Hello and welcome back. I'm Steve Murphy, a trust and estates attorney with McGuire Woods LLP, and this is Legacy Planning Once Removed, my podcast on estate planning, trusts, property, legacy, and everything else on my mind. On this podcast, we talk about structures to use to transfer wealth, not just how much, but how to transfer that wealth in the right structure and with the right controls and with the right goals and values in mind. And we always keep that goal in mind, to have the wealth used in the right way. A lot of my conversations with clients steer in that direction. We're talking about structures to use and issues related to tax or asset protection. And then they start to ask questions about how to transfer those values. It might be just general values, like communicating their approach on work-life balance or a belief in education. Or it might be they want to transfer their view on approaches to specific situations, like how they would evaluate an investment. Those could be really valuable to those next generations. And I talked about some of those concepts a few episodes ago in the episode on the letter of wishes. That letter of wishes is all about how to leave behind a letter that communicates some of those values after you're gone. That is, once you're removed from the situation. Again, that's a reference to the title of this podcast. But then the question is how to transfer those values right now, before you're removed, when you're right here, right now. And that's what this episode is about. It's just a few thoughts on that process, how to transfer your goals and values now. I came up with the idea for this episode because I realized it was time to sort of go off script a little bit. This podcast has been really successful from my perspective. I've gotten a lot of great comments from clients and students and at conferences. And a lot of these listeners have found it to be a really helpful resource. And it's been about a year. I've done about 26 episodes at about 2 per week. So on the one hand, maybe it's time for a nice step back. Or maybe it's just time that I can talk about whatever is really on my mind. After all, you'll know that I start each episode by reminding the audience that this podcast is also about whatever's on my mind or whatever is on my clients' minds. And my kids would say that if you find me in a quiet moment and ask me what's on my mind, then I'd say one thing: golf. Of course, that's just my kids exaggerating a little bit. We have young kids and I have a full work life, so I'm not on the golf course all the time. But I do enjoy golf and I enjoy thinking about golf. But it's for a lot of reasons that you might not expect. I enjoy golf for the reasons that we'll talk about on this episode. So this is kind of an episode about golf. But it's not just about golf. It's about golf-like activities. It's about activities that you can do with others across generations and that are active and then don't just involve others as a spectator. So here's just a quick list of some of those golf-like activities. I came up with this long list and it's by no means exclusive. So how about gardening? My wife really enjoys that as a pastime. Cooking, sewing, arts and crafts, horseback riding, caring for horses or pets, painting and sculpture, working on old cars, sailing, pickleball, and the list goes on and on. You might have your own golf-like activity that comes to mind. In this episode, I'll be talking about golf, but again, I realize not everyone is into golf. So when I say golf, just substitute whatever you think of. Substitute gardening or painting or whatever else you have in mind. And I hope you'll find this helpful. So this episode will have 3 parts. First, I'll talk about why we need golf or golf-like activities. What's the problem or the need we face? It relates to that problem of how to pass those values to the next generations. Second, I'll talk about why golf-like activities and the lessons they teach could be a solution to that problem. And third, I'll make a few comments about how to incorporate those kinds of lessons back into your estate plan. So first, let's talk about the problem. When we talk about estate planning, we often fall into talking in metaphors or generalizations. Think back to Warren Buffett's comment that I quoted back in episode 1. He said this: "You should leave your children enough so they can do anything, but not enough so they can do nothing." That's a great comment, and my clients really enjoy when I sort of parse that comment. But as we've seen in all these other episodes, the trick is actually how to accomplish what Warren Buffett has in mind. Not just how much to leave to that person, but when and how. So as we talk about transferring those values, here's another great metaphor. We might think of the transfer of wealth like a football game. In football, we draw out this complicated play to get the ball, let's say, into the hands of the wide receiver. We train and we train and we study the playbook. And at game time, the center snaps the ball, the line protects the quarterback, and everyone carefully runs the routes. And the quarterback lets it fly. The ball goes up, and the receiver catches it. Success. But then we suddenly realize, then what? Because we never bothered to practice what happens after the wide receiver catches it. We were so focused on the transfer of the ball itself that we forgot to think about what happens after the transfer. We never thought about the wide receiver actually being an actor, running with the ball, running after the catch. So now let's come back to our example of trust and estates. We talk a lot about transferring wealth, the blocking and the tackling, like avoiding probate, that's episode 2, and reducing or managing taxes, that's lots of episodes, and protecting the assets from creditors, that's episode 27, just a few episodes ago. But now let's talk about the then what. What's the method for that training to prepare the beneficiary or the next generation to receive and use those assets? Because this is that person being an actor, being a human, being creative, making their own decisions. How do you teach that? That's a real challenge. There are books written about that. I have thought exercises to go through that with my clients. I give longer presentations on that. It's no easy issue. But here we just have a few minutes. So in our time together in this section, let's talk about one solution to that problem. And that solution is golf. Or remember, substitute golf-like activity. In teaching any subject, we don't just want to fall back into the stereotypical setting of a teacher at a lectern lecturing to the students. That never actually really works. Sometimes people think about transferring values that way, like a bunch of kids gathered around the feet of an elderly parent or grandparent. Instead, there are studies that show the importance of learning in specific ways that can be much more helpful and productive. First, there's showing. This is when a person teaches by doing the thing and the students observe. Sometimes the distinction is this is not explanation, but illustration. And this is sometimes called observational learning. Or there's learning by doing the thing. This is sometimes called participatory learning. And maybe there's a subset of that. There's learning by being in a difficult situation and problem solving to the result. Sometimes this is called action learning, or I love the term adventure learning, or experiential learning. And sometimes the goal here is to develop that subset we talk about a lot these days, which is called executive function. And you can see where I'm going with this. Golf and these golf-like activities provide a means for each of those kinds of learning, of showing, participatory learning, adventure learning, experiential learning, and the rest. But before we think about what it is that golf is teaching, let's think for a moment just about what golf is to you. I often give you a thought exercise at the end of an episode. In this case, let's do that exercise right now during the episode. So grab a pencil. You know, in my mind, maybe you've even grabbed a golf pencil. And if you're driving, don't actually write anything down, obviously. But here's the question. Why do you play golf? What is golf to you? One great thing about golf is that it's flexible and scalable. Everyone brings their own definition to golf. So here's just a few thoughts. Right now, it's 2024. And in this election season, there was a lot of talk between Biden and Trump about golf. But I'm actually interested in other presidents and how they've approached golf. Turns out a lot of them had their own way of thinking about golf. How about Lyndon B. Johnson? Apparently, he didn't really follow the rules of scoring. He would go out and hit shots until he had one that he liked. Apparently, he took about 400 swings per round. Or Calvin Coolidge. He actually didn't like playing golf at all. He played out of obligation. Here's a fun fact about the president. He was actually called Silent Cal. Apparently didn't talk very much. He wrote his own will. He signed it in December 1926 when he was still president. And it was just 23 words in length. Here's what it says. Not unmindful of my son John, I give all my estate, both real and personal, to my wife Grace Coolidge in fee simple. This is an interesting story, but it's actually not a great will. It doesn't even name an executor, for example. So beware of short wills. But it's an interesting comment about Silent Cal. Anyway, back to Calvin Coolidge's golf game. When he left office, apparently he left his clubs in the White House, didn't want to play anymore. And some presidents just have funny comments about golf. Here's what Gerald Ford said. I know I'm getting better at golf because I'm hitting fewer spectators. All these presidents approach golf in their own way. So that's the question for you. What is golf to you? I could share with you some reasons I like golf and what values I think it teaches, but I have thought a lot about this and read a lot, so I thought I'd use some comments of others instead. Here's like a statement from a filmmaker, Eric Anders Lang. Here's what he says. Golf, above all other sports that I know of, teaches us to deal with a great many important things: humility, responsibility, selflessness, practice, patience, attitude, respect, and most of all, recovery. When we find ourselves in difficult spots on the course or in life, we have the opportunity to take the bad with the good, to find the silver lining, to muster the concentration and courage to get ourselves out of the spot with a positive attitude. That's what I play for, to learn this lesson over and over and over and over again. And one thing is for certain, even if I never get it perfect, at least I'm still in the game. Looking at this quote, we see a lot of the adjectives of what clients are trying to instill in the next generation: humility, responsibility, practice, patience, respect, recovery, and dealing with mistakes. I'd like to emphasize one, treating others with respect, treating fellow players with respect, people in front of you, people behind you on the course, the staff that helps. And we can add a few others to this nice list. Golf can teach appreciation for nice things and all the work that goes into it. Golf is also a great connector of people. Oliver Horowitz, the author of American Caddy in St. Andrews, he says that golf, by its nature, is actually a social game. It's ideally played in small groups, outside in green open space where there's just space to talk. And during that walk, he finds that when you're in motion, that conversation just naturally happens. And so he thinks that after 2 or 3 holes, people really start to open up, they get relaxed. So if you want to chat, he says, don't rush it. You've got plenty of time. Give people their space, and that conversation naturally happens. So golf is very open in that way because people of all ages and all skill levels can play together. And it's a great way to meet people from different industries and professions and get to know them just as a person outside of their work lives. And sometimes we talk about the best way to pass values is to actually pass those relationships and connections. Look back to episode 15, what I call the Rich Relative Playbook. That's been a really popular episode. I appreciate everyone's comments on that. So here's why golf is the solution or a solution to this problem. Golf is a great learning environment. There's a podcast called The Par Train that talks about golf as the ultimate learning platform. That's a great line, and there's a lot to that. And of all the great traits that we talked about, golf allows for that observational learning. You're not just telling someone how you should respect and appreciate others, but you're showing it. It's participatory learning. You're not just talking about practice and dedication, but the beneficiary gets the chance to participate. It's that experiential or action or adventure learning where the player can actually practice recovery and figuring it out. Okay, so to be clear, I don't want you to turn golf into just a teaching experience. That takes all the fun out of it. And rather, I'd want you to think about the ways that golf, if approached in the right way, can naturally bring out all of those lessons that you'd want to pass on to the beneficiaries or to the next generation. Of course, there are plenty of critics of golf. And we can talk about some of the bad side or the risks of golf. When we talk about that, it actually seems to be the same kinds of risks of passing down wealth. I mean, we would hope that passing down wealth leads to gratitude and respect and humility, all the things we've talked about the benefits of golf. But I think we all know that all too often passing down wealth could lead to a sense of entitlement or a sense of selfishness or putting someone in an exclusive or an aristocratic setting. That seems to be maybe the same risks of golf. But then again, isn't that the risk of any of these pastimes? And isn't that the risk of passing down wealth in general? So it seems like in the face of those potential risks or concerns, you could either just give up and not try to deal with it, or you could look for the right setting, the right training ground, and then try to teach those positive values and attributes. And I feel like golf, or this golf-like activity, could be just the thing. So for example, are you trying to show the beneficiary what it looks like when someone is appreciative and grateful? That can start with being appreciative to all the staff at the golf course and fixing divots on the course. I leave plenty. And repairing ball marks on the green, not just your own ball mark, but others. Or are you trying to show the beneficiary what it looks like when someone is dealing with adversity then be mindful of that when they see you shank a ball, which we've all done and we will all continue to do. That being said, one challenge about golf is that it is a very hard game. So for that reason, sometimes it's hard to break into. But a great thing about golf is that it's flexible and scalable. If you're into golf, you know all the ways to make sure everyone can participate. Maybe it's a scramble or a best ball or moving up tees. But the idea is that golf can be adjusted to make sure it's a welcoming environment for this whole experience. So if this speaks to you, that you're thinking about how to transfer some of those values, I'd encourage you to look for a golf-like activity in your life. That opportunity to teach the values you want to pass down, whatever they may be, in a setting that allows for one or more of observational learning, participatory learning, experiential learning, and the like. Okay, so this has been fun to talk about golf, but this podcast is still about estate planning. So in this third section, for just a few minutes, let me close with a comment about how to incorporate those same lessons into your estate plan. That is, if we think golf is such a great learning platform, then how can we incorporate some of those same lessons into the structure we choose for the estate plan? Well, on this podcast, I've talked about the importance of the beneficiary being active in the process and opportunities for observational learning and participatory learning and experiential learning and the like. And then on this podcast, generally, we talk about three basic ideals we can build into an estate plan and into a trust. Number one, access. Who's that beneficiary who can receive the benefit of the trust? Second, control. Who's the trustee or the decision maker for the trust? And third, flexibility. Who has the ability to change that structure? In each of these, let's imagine ways to have the beneficiary be active. Maybe not fully in control, maybe not yet, but over time. That is, let's turn the trust itself into that ultimate learning platform. When we think about the beneficiary having access to trust funds, let's think of a beneficiary who's active in the process. Maybe it's a beneficiary who has to submit and defend a budget and then has to stick by that budget and live with the consequences. So in that case, it's not just about receiving funds from the trust, it's about teaching responsibility and appreciation and recovery. And when it comes to investments, the beneficiary could be encouraged to be active, to review those investments and ask questions. This concept is in episode 14. I summarized Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis, and now they don't plan to just give their children money, but they'd encourage their children to find good business opportunities and pitch them to the parents. So again, a way to teach responsibility and thoughtfulness for investments. When we think about the trustee, let's think about the beneficiary being active in response to the trustee. I've spoken in some episodes about how the beneficiary could even be co-trustee or sole trustee. But even if the beneficiary isn't quite ready for that, the beneficiary could be an active participant in selecting the trustee. The beneficiary could have the right to remove and replace the trustee with a bank or trust company. That issue of removal and replacements in episode 10, or there's any other ways the beneficiary could be active in interacting with the trustee. And lastly, when we think about flexibility, the beneficiary could also be active in thinking about the future of the trust and about thinking through how to exercise any power of appointment they may have. That's a term I talk about in episode 25. So in all these ways, we could have a beneficiary who's an active participant in the trust structure. Even if the beneficiary isn't 100% in control, the way he or she would be if there was no trust at all. So when I've spoken with people about this episode, some of them have just asked me if this is just going to be an excuse for my clients to go out and play golf. Well, of course it is. No, well, what I'm really saying is that if you're trying to find ways to transfer those values, then look for that golf-like activity, something that you already enjoy and something that the beneficiary might also enjoy. And then during that activity, think about ways to reinforce these lessons. And when we envision a setting when you're no longer with us, once you're removed, then think of ways that the estate plan itself can embody those values and continue to pass them along. I'm Steve Murphy, and this has been Legacy Planning Once Removed, my podcast on thoughtful estate planning, and from time to time about golf. Thanks for listening.